What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing the connection between abductions and the missing in the woods. This is something I've been working on for a really long time. It's going to be a multiple-parter. I will say it feels so good to be back in front of the camera and back in discussion with you guys after the 2-week hiatus I took for some family stuff and just a little chill time for myself. But I am back in full force. I missed you guys so much. And with that being said, let's jump right in. When the average person in the United States or Canada thinks about a dangerous place to go and somewhere they would want to probably stay away from, I doubt the national parks and other beautiful woodlands of the world, which showcase the gorgeous scenery and landscapes of Mother Nature herself, would be something that would come to mind. It's a fact, though, that this should be the scariest place of all for any of us. The problem is the quote-unquote average American and Canadian don't know the full scope of what's really going on out there in areas where they go on their family camping trips or hiking with their church groups, on a picnic with someone they love, or even for a walk around to pick some delicious berries. The possibilities of what we can do when out in Mother Nature are seemingly endless, and I'm here to discuss with you why the dangers of these very places are too. Before we get into the rest of today's video, though, I just want to talk quickly about the sponsor for this video. It'll only take a minute or two, so don't go anywhere. Nail Reserve Los Angeles is sponsoring this video, and they were kind enough to send me the base coat and the top coat. It's a vegan, cruel-free gel lamp nail polish. It's very quick drying. I got like a really cheap lamp to try this stuff out. I put one coat of the base, one coat of the color, and one coat of the top, 90 seconds each. It doesn't chip. It doesn't peel. The longer you leave it under the light, the better. Okay, they sent me some colors that I picked out, and this is my favorite, Dusk at Sea. It's the exact color that's on here. I did have my nails done. I am going to do them again. You guys know I like long nails, and unfortunately my real nails are not that long. But I know you guys trust me, and take my word for it. I'm telling you, Dusk at Sea, look at that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful green. We also have the Precious, and I really loved this one too. I'm going to use this one for my mom's nails. It has a beautiful sparkle to it. What you see right there is exactly what you get. So when you look at the color on top, cherry soda, you know that that is the color you're going to get. I use this on my toes. This is what's on my toes this week, but I'm not showing you all my toes. I feel bad because every time I try to paint my nails, they're like so teeny tiny from putting the acrylics on. But you guys know what I'm talking about. Aqualicious, look at that beautiful blue. It actually has a little purple in there. I have tried every single color. I have tried just the top coat to make my nails look perfectly and beautifully manicured. I am going to do a video, like an ad that I can just pop in, but I haven't had the time and I really wanted to get back to filming. So thank you, Nail Reserve Los Angeles, for sponsoring this video. Guys, you're going to get a 50% discount when you buy 2 or more. In the description box, you will find a link. Just click that link, go to Nail Reserve Los Angeles, and type in the code GemmaJ, capital G-E-M-M-A-J, for 50% off 2 or more polishes. Guys, I'm telling you, it is so worth it. My pedicure is probably lasting almost 2 months now with no chipping. All right, so take my word for it. I promise I'll have an ad where I show you exactly how it works. But you guys know UV gel nail polish, right? You ladies out there, some of you men. And if you men aren't interested in that, maybe think of it as a gift for your lady. It is pedicure season, okay? Thank you, Nail Reserve Los Angeles, for being my first ever sponsor, and I hope I'm making you all proud. Back to the video. While there are many different reasons that our national parks and the woodlands of the world are dangerous places, I want to speak to you today specifically about the people who go missing in them. Those who are never seen or heard from again, those who are found deceased under highly unusual circumstances, those who return with no memory of what happened to them, and even those who return with their memory intact, only to tell of a highly strange or extremely terrifying ordeal from which they'll most likely never recover. Many of us in this community have heard of this missing phenomenon before, and I'm sure most of us have our own theories or opinions as to what could be causing these strange disappearances. I believe that everyone, even if we all have a completely different opinion as to what's going on out there, would be right in some capacity or another. I believe there are many things responsible and that each case is different. However, I am of the opinion that extraterrestrials are mainly the ones we can look to for answers as to exactly what is going on out there all over the world, over and over again, to the human race as a whole. This is a humanity issue, guys, not a science thing. It's not an individual thing. It's not a familial thing. It's a human thing. This phenomenon knows no race, social standing, gender, sex, or anything else. It happens seemingly randomly to people of all ages, shapes, religions, and sizes. There are several parameters we have been made aware of that happen almost every time, either before, during, or after one of these abductions. And I'm going to show you how abduction by extraterrestrials can explain every single one of those parameters. I want to be very clear, though, that not only do the national parks not keep a record of its missing, but they seem to be going so far as to hide this information from the public. Why? Tourism cannot be the only reason for their complete denial and lack of transparency. I mean, can it? Hopefully that's a question we may someday be able to answer, but I assure you, as of right now, we aren't even close to obtaining answers. Our lives are at stake here, and it leaves many of us scratching our heads. We, meaning those of us in the field of ufology, seem to know a lot more than anyone is willing to accept, as we have seen the same things going on in our woods over and over again in our own community, and by the end of this, I'm sure you will have made the connection as well. The average ages of the victims range from 20 months old to 12 years old, and now 70 to 85 years old. That's not to say there haven't been more than a reasonable amount of people of all ages who have gone missing in the same way. That's just to say, admittedly, by a very small fraction, these age groups are the most likely to go missing in this way if we're to look at the statistics, which, remember, are incomplete because places like national parks are not being held accountable or being forced to keep a record of its missing. And I don't mean to harp on that, but that's pretty effed up. As far as I can tell, not a single person carrying a firearm and only one carrying a transponder have ever been reported missing while out in the woods. On the other hand, in the majority of cases where the missing is a child, they have had a dog with them. In some of those cases, the canine returns and the child never does. Children who are found either can't remember or won't talk about their experiences, and even on the small chance they do, the bizarre things they say are almost always chalked up to an active and scared imagination. I could go on and on with statistics, and I mean, how many times can we blame it on a wild animal or an accidental fall only for the body to never have been found? There would be evidence of both those things. There are just way too many coincidences, guys, and in this community, we usually don't believe in coincidences anyway. I know that I don't. So, how do extraterrestrials play into all of this? Let's start with a case that most of us know well, the case of Dennis Martin, a 6-year-old boy who went missing on June 14th, 1969 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis was from Knoxville, Tennessee, and was camping with his family in the park when he vanished without a trace. It was a beautiful and mild summer day when the unthinkable happened, and the Martin family would never be the same because of it. The hiking and camping trip the family was on was part of a long-standing Father's Day tradition, and the family had gone to the same spot in the same area of the mountain for years and years, and nothing bad had ever happened. In fact, when we are out there in the beautiful wilds of Mother Nature, it's hard to even imagine that something terrible could happen or is capable of happening. That's one of the problems, guys. We leave our guards down, and while more light has been shed on the missing phenomenon, and while this community, the community of ufology, has also made great strides in informing the public about and protecting ourselves against attacks of any kind from otherworldly creatures and or forces, it won't be enough until we can sit and analyze cases like Dennis's with an open mind and some rational and reasonable thinking. Dennis's grandfather, Clyde Martin, had brought his 33-year-old son, Bill Martin, who then brought along his own children. His oldest son, Douglas, was 9, and his little one, Dennis, was only 6 years old. This particular trip was special for Dennis, as it was the very first overnight camping trip with the men in his family who, again by tradition, did this every year for Father's Day. So it was his first time that he was able to go and camp overnight with the men, with the boys. That's exciting for a little boy. The Martin family was joined by another family who also, either by coincidence or through some distant blood relation, I don't know, I couldn't find like one source said one thing, another said another, so it was either by coincidence or they were distantly related. Their last names were also Martin. The father, Carter, also brought along his 2 sons. The group traveled together and got through the first night unharmed, and with all of them having a ton of fun. On their second day there, all of the Martins packed up their gear and hiked a 2.9-mile trail to meet more of Carter Martin's siblings and relatives who would be joining them on the trip from there on out. Later on that day, the 4 Martin children were playing together between the Appalachian Trail and the Spencer Field shelter. Bill Martin would later recall that it seemed the boys were planning some sort of quote-unquote surprise attack on the adults and had split off into groups. So they wanted to like jump out and scare the adults. Typical kid stuff, right? Total typical kid stuff. Douglas Martin and Carter Martin's 2 sons headed south of the shelter while little Dennis, not very conspicuous in his bright red shirt, but trying his best to hide like the other boys nonetheless, headed up the hill toward the Appalachian Trail in the opposite direction of the other boys. Within just a few minutes, all of the children came running out from behind bushes and towards the adults. All of the children, that is, except Dennis. According to Clyde Martin's sister, Irma, little Dennis had never been on the entire trip more than 30 feet away from the adults, and yet he vanished into thin air. He disappeared without a trace. Dennis's father, Bill, said that within 3 to 5 minutes, he was extremely worried and started calling out for Dennis, and that he had taken off on a full run right up the Appalachian Trail in the direction of Russell Fields, and Clyde Martin went in the opposite direction towards Thunderhead Mountain. Everyone was searching almost immediately, but to no avail, and they pretty much notified the park services almost immediately too. A complete search effort coordinated by Chief Ranger Lee Sneddon was initiated the following morning at 5 a.m. The search for little Dennis Martin became one of the largest search efforts in National Park Service history, lasting from June until the first couple weeks of September that same year. There were comprehensive grid searches, and every available resource was used more than once in the hopes of locating Dennis, or at least a clue as to where he could have gone or what could have happened to him. No trace of him was found, and no clues as to what his fate was either. There was an unprecedented amount of press attention given to this case for the time, and still no tangible leads were unearthed. It seemed as though little Dennis Martin walked away from his friends while they played and his family was within feet of him, and then he walked right off the face of the earth. There didn't even seem to be any evidence the boy had ever been there. That's how little there was for investigators and the families who work with in this case. It was extremely bizarre and even more tragic. There's more rumor and speculation than anyone would ever know what to do with regarding this case, but here's where I ask you, is it possible? Could Dennis Martin have literally gone off the face of the earth? It's impossible for us to truly know, and that's what makes Dennis's case and other like it seem dismissible and completely lacking credibility to the non-believer and to the skeptic too. Remember, guys, the skeptic has to be right every day. The believer only has to be right once. But skeptics have a field day with this case because they're like, show us the evidence. And we're like, yeah, we wish we could, right? People don't just vanish into thin air. They have to go and end up somewhere. A 6-year-old doesn't run away to start a new life, and no evidence has ever been found to show that Dennis was abducted by a stranger or that any form of animal predation or human element was involved. Both would have left either witnesses of some sort or, at the very least, a freaking clue. Admittedly, the thoughts of a child being abducted by extraterrestrials in the woods or otherwise makes not only the act itself, but our own lack of answers even more unsettling. It's a child, especially if we keep in mind that the ones who come back often describe the same horrible and oftentimes painful medical procedures being conducted on them for children and adults. Also, in many of the cases of child abductions, they claim to have met what they know to be hybrids as well. Leaving behind for a moment national parks and public land areas to discuss the missing in the woods in general. Take Jesse Long, for example. In 1957, he was just 5 years old when he said he was abducted for the first time. He was exploring some woods near his house with his brother, and they were just messing around and doing what young boys do when outside in nature. Nothing nefarious or strange going on at all. Jesse claims he came upon a, quote, round structure in a clearing, end quote, and he and his brother approached out of simple childhood curiosity. What was only described as, quote, a tall figure, end quote, appeared out of nowhere and somehow paralyzed the boys. Jesse recalls being brought into the craft and laid out on a cold table, and there were more figures now tall and just like the first one, and he said he could feel them poking and prodding all over his legs. Jesse claims over the course of his life that he was abducted repeatedly, even saying he had sperm removed from his body in order for the extraterrestrials to crossbreed his DNA with one of their females. As time went on, the abductions became not only more traumatic, but more painful and invasive as well. Jesse Long not only claimed a foreign object was placed in his leg the first time he was ever abducted, which by the way remained there for more than 30 years, but there seems to be tangible proof of this, as the object is said to have been removed finally by the Southwest Research Institute in Texas. So they actually did remove a foreign object from his body. The official lab report regarding this foreign object came back and stated that the object had unusual characteristics which could neither be defined nor explained, presumably by modern science. In 1990, Jesse was driving in New Orleans when a bright light appeared, which he knew was an extraterrestrial craft. He was brought on board and handed a baby. He was told the infant was his, and when he looked up and saw at least 9 other children, all ranging in age, he knew immediately and intuitively that those children were also his. So what is all this? This all started with a young boy simply playing and horsing around in some woods with his brother. Of course, there's much more to Jesse's story, but I just want to show that the basics here are always the same. Whether hunting or camping or whatever you're doing out there in the woods or playing near or in your own backyard, there's nowhere to run or hide once you're chosen. Were Jesse and Dennis chosen, or did they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? That's the million-dollar question. There is absolutely no doubt there's a sort of pattern to these vanishings and possible abductions. People are going missing literally in the blink of an eye. More often than not, as in most of the children, and as we have already seen in the case of Dennis Martin, the parent or adult in the situation will literally blink, and the child's gone. It happens with adults too, but it's much more common in the case of children. There are also the patterns of inclement weather drastically hindering any search efforts for any of the missing. It's almost as though who or whatever is abducting them needs a bit more time or something like that. Going forward, I'll be speaking of these cases as if it is a fact that these are extraterrestrial abductions because, well, in the opinion of many, including myself, that's exactly what they are. Berry pickers go missing a lot too, and while many theorize the Fae are wholly responsible for this type of disappearance, I have to agree. Yes, I do feel that the Fae have a lot to do with it. It could also be, though, that the extraterrestrials looking for a certain type of victim could be luring the people to these berry bushes and then making their move. Many people who have been abducted while out picking berries have said they felt as though they were being compelled to go to a certain bush and to pick certain berries. Many of them also report suddenly feeling sick and unable to stand up straight due to dizziness and extreme nausea. Many of the abductions happen in, near, or around boulder fields as well, and it's also quite common for people who have gone missing to turn up deceased to be found in these fields. Coincidence? No such thing in this field and community, I reiterate. There is a connection between extraterrestrials and each and every one of the parameters and the missing phenomenon. Another one is people who are in some woods somewhere for some reason who, either months or even years afterwards, start having nightmares or vivid memories of being abducted. Though it doesn't seem to them like a real memory because they have no recollection of it actually ever happening to them. The ETs use mind control all the time as it suits their needs. So why is it so far-fetched to believe that in these particular cases that they don't have the power to suppress or even erase the victim's memory? And don't even get me started, because it's a whole other series of videos on shield memories. Let's move on and take a look at what has come to be known as the Allagash abductions. In August of 1976, 4 artists were on a camping trip together near Allagash, Maine. Everything was normal again until it wasn't, and the 4 of them each spotted the same orb hovering above some nearby trees. The men's names were Jim and Jack Weiner, Charles Foltz, and Charles Rack. Jim was the first to notice this orb on the second night of the trip, as it hovered for about 30 seconds and then vanished completely. It was easy at that point for the men to have just brushed it off as some form of unexplained anomaly at that point. That's what many people actually think happens to a lot of the missing, that they see, hear, smell, or otherwise notice something strange, but that they can't explain and are able to easily brush it off because of that. They convince themselves they're quote-unquote losing it from being out in the woods too long or lost, and then before they realize what's happening, it's too late and they're abducted. On the 4th night of the trip, August 20th, all 4 men were in a fishing boat when the bright orb appeared in the sky again, this time hovering above them. The men likened the brightness of the object to the sun itself. It was that freaking bright. This time it was Chuck who noticed it first. Chuck tried to signal SOS in Morse code with his flashlight to the object, but this seems to have made matters a lot worse. The men realized that now, after this SOS signal, much more than before, they were the focus of the orb's attention. Suddenly, another, even brighter light shot out of the original one and started to follow the men in the water as they tried to very quickly paddle themselves back to the shore. The men collectively lost time. They remembered paddling in the boat, and then the next thing they knew, they were back on the shore, the light still above them, only to blink out in an instant and once again vanish. The men looked around at each other and at their camp and immediately noticed a few things were very strange and definitely off. First, their fire, which they had started mere minutes before going fishing, was burnt out and cold. This would suggest that they had been gone for several hours instead of, again, the few minutes they actually remembered having been gone for. The men were incredibly fatigued, and it was all too much for them to think about right then, and so they retired and went to bed for the night. The men spent 6 more days in the wilderness without seeing the orb again. When they went home and told their family and friends about what they'd seen and experienced, nobody believed them. However, in 1988, brothers Jack and Jim Weiner started having horrific nightmares, which included themselves and the other 2 men they had camped with back in 1976, sitting naked on a beach and being scared out of their wits. Jim decided that enough was enough and decided to contact UFO researcher Ray Fowler to see if he would be able to help them in any way. Fowler suggested that all 4 of the men undergo hypnosis, and all 4 agreed. They made an agreement with each other that each man would go separately and not tell any of the others what they had uncovered, if anything. Each of the men went under hypnosis, and each man also described in terrifying detail how they were not only abducted but also probed by aliens during that camping trip back in 1976. The aliens took samples of the men's body fluids and skin. Each man remembered something different that the others didn't. For example, while Jack vividly remembered the horrifying faces of the aliens and that they told him not to be afraid but to listen to and do as they said, Charlie was able to describe the ship better. He recalled it being like a doctor's office and how the extraterrestrials put a panel over his body and scraped skin off of it. Chuck said he had a clear view of what they were doing to Charlie and described further what they had done to him and the tools that they used to obtain these samples. He claimed the instruments were silver with curves. He also remembered feeling like Charlie looked like he was in a lot of pain during these procedures. Ray Fowler brought all 4 men together upon completion of their individual hypnoses. Not surprisingly, all 4 men recounted the exact same events. All 4 of the men also passed several polygraph examinations. Of course, there are skeptics who believe the men were simply having nightmares from watching too many scary science fiction movies on TV. All 4 men, however, maintain that what they experienced and remembered was absolutely real and 100% the truth. As terrifying and as horrific as this account may be to some people, it's not very unique by any stretch of the imagination as far as abductions go. How can it be that people from all over the world and from all walks of life going out into the woods, whether alone or in a group, are experiencing the same type of phenomenon? Is this what the missing and never found experience? I sit and try to put every single parameter of every abduction I can think of and wonder how it would fit in with the missing of the world, especially those who have gone from the woods. And it always fits. Not because I make it fit or force it to fit, but simply because it does all on its own. These extraterrestrial beings seem to be able to erase memories, even if only for a time, but also they seem to be able to implant memories. I said shield memories before, and I knew I was wrong. I meant screen memories. Sorry guys, this is 60,000 words. People who go missing and are found may never remember that they were victims of an abduction by some alien race or another, and it may take others their entire lives to figure it out. Put it all together. But then what? Most people who aren't involved in this community wouldn't know who or where to turn should they uncover these sorts of memories. Their mainstream media makes them out to be whack jobs, and they could risk damaging their professional and personal reputations, some even losing their jobs and or families. Are these some of the things that the extraterrestrials take into account when deciding who to abduct? Could it be that they choose people based on whether or not they would be willing or feel able to come forward at some later date and time? Could it all be random, a wrong place, wrong time type of scenario where some poor unlucky man or woman is out for a walk in Mother Nature when they come across something lying in wait for a lone traveler? Of course, as of right now, these are unanswerable questions and ones we may never know the answers to, but it's something we should think about nonetheless. They say once you get involved in this field, even if you aren't a believer or an experiencer, you will be before long. This too has been proven time and time again. Why? Could it simply be, that word again, coincidence? Or could it be possible that the extraterrestrials somehow know who's looking into them and want to teach them some kind of lesson? The questions go on and will run your mind in circles if you allow it to. What is it that these beings want? There has to be an infinite number of extraterrestrial entities described across thousands of accounts worldwide. Even in the woods, there's no standard race of entities who are going around and abducting, experimenting, and possibly killing off human beings one by one or a small group at a time. What about that? What about groups who go into the woods but never come out? Groups of people who are found by search and rescue under extremely bizarre and definitely unexplainable circumstances. Let's explore a case or two and discuss how, if at all, it fits in with my hypothesis that extraterrestrials and their experimentations on us are a big part of what's going on with all these missing people in the woods. Perhaps the most famous or possibly infamous case in which a group of people went into the woods for some reason or another and died, not only tragically, but also under extremely strange circumstances, is, you guessed it, the Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959. There are some who say this mystery has been solved and that it has a rather mundane and ordinary explanation. There are those of us, though, who know better. In January of 1959, a 23-year-old named Igor Alekseyevich Dyatlov led a team of 8 experienced hikers on a journey to reach the peak of Otorten. I'm sorry about the mispronunciation of the names and places. Otorten is a mountain in the northern Urals of Soviet Russia. Most of the 8 travelers who accompanied Igor were from the Ural Polytechnic Institute and were in it mainly for the adventure of it all. Before he left, Igor told his sports team that he would send them a telegram as soon as they got back from their trek. The telegraph, however, was never sent, and not a single one of the 9 hikers who set out that day, including Igor, were ever seen alive again. As each body was found one by one in the coming weeks, the bizarre and gruesome injuries to the bodies of the deceased left the investigators not only baffled, but absolutely repulsed. What had happened to these 9 young people who were innocently out for some adventure in the Ural Mountains? Some of the bodies were missing their eyes, another missing his tongue. Still others were hit with a force which was likened to that of a speeding car, which made no sense by any stretch of the imagination considering the fact that there were no motor vehicles on the snow-covered mountains at the time. No one can make any sense of it, and this is where I bring you my theory, and I am by no means alone, that these young people died as the result of possibly alien experimentation which went somehow horribly awry. The Soviet government seemingly understood the implications and very quickly closed the case, stating the group died of hypothermia and were possible victims of an avalanche. These thin explanations weren't even likely and weren't going to satisfy the public for too long. The families of the victims especially wanted answers. There were too many lingering questions that hypothermia and a possible avalanche just didn't clear up. The Russian government did finally reopen the case in 2019, but there is still no reasonable explanation that has been given for what happened more than 60 years ago up in those snow-capped mountains. It's been left to armchair detectives and internet sleuths to try to come to some sort of rational conclusion or explanation as to what actually occurred up there. However, nothing concrete has ever been gleaned, and more questions than answers still remain to this day. There were cameras and diaries discovered at the site of the hikers' camp. Investigators were able to conclude that on February 1st, 1959, the group began to make their way through the path leading to Otorten. The path was still unnamed at that time. The climate was hostile, to say the least, but the team pushed their way toward the base of the mountain. As they did this, they were hit with incredible snowstorms that ripped through this very narrow pass. Due to the decrease in visibility, the team lost their sense of direction, and instead of moving towards Otorten, they accidentally deviated and went west. They eventually found themselves at the slope of another nearby mountain. Unsurprisingly, this mountain has a rather ominous name, as most places where the missing end up becoming so have words like devil, death, Satan, hell, and so on in them. This mountain was called Kholat Syakhl, which translates to Dead Mountain. For unknown reasons, before they even attempted to ascend Otorten, Dyatlov decided they would camp there at the base of Dead Mountain and perhaps get their bearings by the time morning came upon them again. A search was launched 19 days later when no one had seen or heard from the hikers. The volunteer rescue force that trekked through the pass found their campsite rather quickly, but the hikers themselves seemed to be nowhere in the immediate area. This is when the military and police investigative teams were sent in to try and uncover what had become of this team. There wasn't much hope for them to be found alive, but still in all, the investigators wanted to at least find their bodies and see how they had met their demise. The route they had chosen was remarkably difficult, even for how experienced all 9 hikers were said to be. Add to that the inclement weather and low visibility, and it was almost certain disaster and death had befallen them. Accidents were a real danger, even under the best of conditions. The investigators went into this believing that some random accident had befallen the team due to the treacherous and rugged, not to mention snow-filled terrain. It should have been an open and shut case in their minds. The fact that they eventually found the bodies wasn't what surprised them, though. The state of the bodies, as I previously mentioned, was the terrifying and most confusing part of the entire effort. It was always meant to be a recovery mission. Nobody could have ever foresaw in their wildest dreams what was to come next when the bodies were examined. The bodies were discovered scattered about the base of Dead Mountain 6 days after the initial search was launched on February 26th. A mystery that still persists to this day would be unearthed. All of it leading, in the opinion of so many, to experimentation and possible abduction by extraterrestrials. The condition of the campsite was the first red flag to the investigators. The tent had been cut open from the inside and it was nearly completely destroyed. Almost all of the team's belongings, including several pairs of their shoes, were left behind at the campsite. Whatever had taken place here, the hikers had seemingly left in a major hurry. Investigators next came across 8 or 9 sets of footprints, which were later determined to have belonged to the team. Most of these footprints were made by a foot that was wearing neither shoes nor socks. These tracks led almost a mile away from the camp and to the entrance of some nearby woods. Barefoot, guys. A mile in the snow and inclement weather, this crazy situation, and for some reason this person walked almost an entire mile barefoot. Under a small cedar tree right there at the edge of those woods, evidence of a small fire and the first 2 bodies were found. These would be that of 23-year-old Yuri Krivonishenko, and 21-year-old Yuri Doroshenko. On the night of their deaths, the temperatures were -13 to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite this, however, their bodies were found not only shoeless, but the men were also wearing nothing but their underwear. The next 3 bodies were found, seemingly having tried making it back towards their camp from the cedar tree at the edge of the woods where the 2 Yuris were found. These bodies were those of Igor Dyatlov, 23, and Rustin Slobodin, and 22-year-old Zenaida Kolmogorova. Despite the obviously strange circumstances, the investigators, upon their initial discovery of the bodies, were still thinking this was a clear-cut case of hypothermia. It initially made sense, as none of the bodies showed any indication of the severe external damage beyond what had been inflicted by the cold. Upon further inspection, though, it was pretty clear that there was more to all of this than the initial assessment. However, it was still unknown, though, what exactly had befallen this poor group of young people. There was no explanation as to why Yuri Doroshenko's complexion was described as, quote, brownish purple, end quote, in complexion, or why he had gray liquid coming from his mouth and gray foam coming from his right cheek. The hands of the 2 Yuris found under the cedars also seemed to be scraped away, and the branches in the trees above them were torn down. It looked as though the 2 men were making a desperate attempt at escaping someone or something by seeking shelter inside and up the tree. Meanwhile, Rustin Slobodin had injuries which were consistent with someone falling and hitting their head over and over and over again, and Miss Kolmogorova had a bruise in the shape of a baton on her side. These 2, along with the others who had been found so far, were all almost completely unclothed, and the clothes they were wearing were not their own. This supports the idea that they were caught off guard and ill-prepared for whatever it was that they were facing. They obviously had had inadequate time to get their things together and even to get themselves dressed in order to flee. We are talking about very experienced hikers here, not some young kids out for a good time who didn't know what they were doing or even what to expect. It was very apparent even before the final 4 bodies were discovered that something unexpected has happened, and very suddenly, which drove the team into a complete panic and chaos as they went about trying desperately to escape who or whatever it was with their lives. It wasn't until several months later that the final 4 bodies were found and that the mystery deepened a hell of a lot more. The discovery of those 4 final bodies was what makes this case even more terrifying than it already is. The 4 remaining hikers were found in a ravine which was 75 meters deeper into the woods than the cedar, where the other 2 were found, buried under the snow and in a place known as the Dyatlov Pass Den. These bodies told an even more confusing and even more gruesome story than the first 5 who were found. Nikolai Thibodeau Brignoles, who was only 23 years old, suffered significant skull damage in the moments before his death. The youngest member of the group, Lyudmila Dubinia, was only 20, and the eldest member, Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, were the ones who had severe chest fractures caused by the aforementioned immense force, which was comparable to that of a car crash. In what many believe was perhaps the most gruesome part of this entire tragedy, Miss Dubinina was missing her eyes, tongue, and parts of her lips, as well as facial tissue and a piece of her skull. The body of 24-year-old Alexander Kolevatov was found in the same location as Miss Dubinini, but without any of her very severe and bizarre wounds. The second group of bodies showed that the hikers all must have died at relatively different times, as it seems as though they were making use of the articles of clothing of the hikers who had died before them. Miss Dubinina's foot was wrapped in a piece of Mr. Kirivanashenko's wool pants, and Zolotaryov was found in Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat, suggesting he had taken them from her after she had died, just as she had taken clothes from Kirivashenko earlier. Most mysterious of all could be the fact that Dubinina and Kolevatov's clothing showed evidence of being radioactive. Sorry, I am butchering these names. But it's evidence like this that makes this case not only so baffling, but also so fascinating to the people in this field and to those not involved in ufology at all. The Soviet government didn't want anyone asking questions and therefore insinuated that it was due to the team's own ineptitude and inexperience that they met this strange and tragic demise. What was it that could account for these experienced hikers, though young, to flee in the middle of the night with the weather like it was, in too much of a hurry to put on shoes or take their own clothing? Some speculated early on that it was due to an attack from a local tribe called the Mansi and an attack on the hikers for being in their territory. This explanation held almost no water, however, as the Mansi were widely known as a peaceful tribe, and more so, the evidence didn't match any kind of human attack or even a human element at all. No, this was something different altogether, guys. But have we ever seen anything like this before or since? I'll get to that. To round up this encounter, the government came to the conclusion that an avalanche had caused all of this. A swift and violent avalanche. The sound of snow collapsing, an early warning of the deluge to come, would have frightened the hikers out of their tents in a state of undress and sent them sprinting for the tree line. An avalanche would also have been powerful enough to inflict the injuries that killed the second group of hikers. But why cut themselves out of the tent? As hard as they tried to keep coming up with reasonable explanations, or ones they thought at least would silence the public and the families of the victims, the physical evidence just did not support any of these claims, especially not an avalanche. No matter how many ways they tried to make it fit, it just didn't, and the public knew this. Locals familiar with the terrain even came forward later to state that a natural disaster simply wouldn't have been able to inflict such violent and vile injuries on the victims. There was also the fact that when investigators found the bodies, they noted no evidence that an avalanche had occurred at any time recently in that region. There was no damage to the tree line, and searchers observed no debris. There is so much more evidence to the contrary of a natural disaster, avalanche or otherwise, or to a human element or anything else the government was trying to cover this up with, and the people knew it. People still know it, and that's why I've spent so much time here with you today discussing this one particular case. Pieces of skin and bone being taken. Organs seemingly being harvested, even if only from one person, sounds a lot to me like the experiments many people have described experiencing during an abduction from ETs in UFOs. Does it all fit? No, but it never does when we're dealing with things like this. In this community, it never all fits together. But why all the violence? Well, it's a known fact that not all extraterrestrial species come in peace, guys, and many of them don't understand or experience any type of emotion as we humans do, and they don't experience physical pain, at least not in the same way either. Would they resort to violence to either get what they needed or even resort to what we humans call murder and violence? Well, that depends on what that particular race or species is experimenting on us for at that specific time. This is where our lack of knowledge can be very frustrating, because what we think we know is in fact alien activity, specifically regarding abductions from or even attacks inside of the woods and forests of the world. There are those in other fields, such as the supernatural, that also want to lay claim to some of these events. Admittedly, there are some cases where the lines are very blurred, and even a well-researched expert could have trouble making that distinction. Guys, I've rambled on for long enough. So that's all I have for you today. I will definitely bring you a part 2, 3, 4, however many parts is needed to get through this basic entire book that I wrote here about the connection between abductions and the missing in the woods. I wrote this completely for something else, for someone else, but I don't think they're going to care. It is my writing. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Please leave a comment below. I really appreciate hearing your guys' opinions and thoughts on all this kind of stuff. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Share it with everyone you can think of that may want to see it. Share it on your social medias. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you would be so kind to go on over to my other startup channel, MoonBearOracle, I would really appreciate it. That channel's kind of not moving at all right now, but having the subs over there is kind of giving me that kick in the butt to get things moving. I want to thank Nail Reserve Los Angeles once again for sponsoring this video. Guys, if I could recommend any color, obviously it would be the ones I chose, but they have like hundreds of colors there with these really adorable names. If you are a green person like I am, Dusk at Sea. If you are a pink person, The Precious. And this cherry soda red is like this cute flirty little date night spring summer color, but it can also be a winter color because it reminds me like of a Christmassy type. Like this is a spring green, but this can also be a winter color. Although it's summer now, have that pedicure last for a month or two. Get that manicure looking right with the base and top coat. We also have Aqualicious, a beautiful dark and vibrant bluish purple. I guess it's like a violet, not violent, a violet color. If you go in the description box and click the link to Nail Reserve Los Angeles, a vegan and cruelty-free gel UV lamp drying nail polish company, you will get 50% off your order of 2 polishes or more by using code GemmaJ, capital GEMMAJ. Guys, my book, Missing the Faith Theory, I will leave a link to the Amazon paperback and Kindle version in the description box. If you would like an autographed copy, please hit me up through email at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com and I will get that out to you. Also, my new book was released last Thursday, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories by me and Steve Stockton. Steve wrote a lot about like famous murder cases. I wrote a lot about my personal experiences, and I know you guys love to hear about those. So pick up this book. It's also on Amazon. I will leave the link in the description box. Again, if you want an autographed signed copy from yours truly, email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. If you have any encounters with the supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, otherworldly, whatever it is that's crazy or insane or scary or terrifying, please email them to me for my listener encounter series. And also they may end up in a book like this one of these days at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. As far as Oracle goes, if you would like a personal intuitive Oracle reading from me, I do them remotely. You can hit me up at MoonBearOracle@gmail.com for more information, or a 1-hour face-to-face session through either StreamYard, Zoom, Skype, Duo, whatever. Again, hit me up for more info. It's like 7 to 10 cards, sometimes 12 or more, depending on like if it's a face-to-face hour. You ask questions, I pull the cards, or again, I can just give you that really complexive, like in-depth personal reading that a lot of you guys look for on Wednesday nights. Speaking of Wednesday nights, I do a 1-card intuitive oracle pull from a random deck, random card, random deck, along with Ghost Dragon ZW. He takes the list. Anyone and everyone that comes in the chat is welcome to get a reading. Come one, come all, first come, first serve. And that's from 7:15 p.m. Eastern time to about 11:15 p.m. Eastern time every single Wednesday. You can come in there and get one of those free or for donation only. Of course, donation recommended. Guys, check out the short video I did, among other things, explaining what my new business is as far as the manifestation and intention sprays. $18.95 shipping included. I'm drop shipping from my house in the continental United States only. Just for now, I'm working on that website and will probably be selling on Amazon soon. But if you want to remove some negative energy from your life, if you just want more happiness or peace of mind, if you want help sleeping, if you want to balance your chakras, whatever it may be, talk to me about it and I'll mix up something for you with moon water, charmed crystals in the mixture, free gift from me on the side, handwritten thank you notes and note from me as well. All of that for $18.95, including shipping. All right, so hit me up for more info on that. To make a donation to the channel, in the description box, you will find links to my PayPal and my Cash App. If you join my Patreon for $20 a month or more, you will automatically receive every single month a free remote personal intuitive oracle reading from me as a thank you, along with all of the other perks that I am and will soon definitely be offering on my Patreon. To my patrons now, thank you so much for sticking with me through these hard times I've been having with coming up with content and finding the time to do that. For those of you who stuck it out with me and didn't abandon me, I really appreciate you, and I have something awesome coming for you guys soon. Thank you again for your patience. Also, the link for my Amazon wish list gift link, decks, crystals, all different types of stuff. These beaded bracelets, these crystal bracelets, I mean, anything and everything you could possibly think of, decorations for my office, all going along with the Oracle and Gemma Jade theme. You can send me a gift from there. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Always be kind to yourself and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. I know I'm forgetting something. And I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.